They claimed I owed them everything. I fought back and exposed their lies. I always believed that family meant love, support, and trust. But that belief shattered the day my parents and siblings turned on me, demanding something unthinkable. "You owe us," my mother's voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. My father stood beside her, his arms crossed, while my older brother and sister nodded in silent agreement. I felt my stomach twist. "Oh, you? What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother scoffed. "Everything you have is because of us. Your education, your success, we made sacrifices for you. And now it's time to pay us back." I stood frozen in place. I had worked tirelessly for years, putting myself through college with scholarships, late-night shifts, and sheer determination. But here they were, rewriting history as if my accomplishments were theirs. My father stepped forward. "We need the money. A significant amount. And if you refuse, well, we can make life very difficult for you." I felt my heart pound against my chest. Was this a joke? A test? But the cold expressions on their faces told me otherwise. I had spent my whole life trying to make them proud, to prove my worth. And now, they were treating me like an ATM, one that they felt entitled to drain. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't the same naive kid who had once longed for their approval. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. And I had a feeling they wouldn't like what I was about to uncover. My name is Olivia, and I grew up in a modest neighborhood where appearances meant everything. My parents prided themselves on maintaining a facade of a happy, supportive family. Neighbors admired us, and I often overheard comments about how lucky I was to have such a close-knit home. But behind closed doors, things were different. From an early age, I understood that love in our household was conditional. My parents poured their attention into my older brother and sister while I had to earn every scrap of approval. Whether it was excelling in school or helping around the house, nothing was ever enough. "We expect more from you," they would say, as if my efforts were a mere obligation rather than achievements worth celebrating. Despite the lack of warmth, I focused on my studies. I worked hard, earned scholarships, and left home as soon as I could for college. It wasn't easy balancing multiple jobs and coursework, but I was determined to build a future for myself, one that wasn't dictated by my family's ever-changing demands. For a while, I thought I had finally broken free. I had a stable career, an apartment of my own, and a small but trusted circle of friends who became the family I never had. But my past had a way of creeping back in. My parents and siblings had never been proud of my independence, they saw it as a threat. Then, one day, the phone calls started. At first, it was subtle, my mother asking how I was doing, my father hinting at their financial troubles. Then, the requests became direct. "We need help," they said. "You should support your family. It's only fair." Fair? I had spent my life being overlooked and treated like an afterthought. Now, they wanted me to carry their burdens. I ignored the calls at first, thinking they would let it go. But the guilt-tripping escalated. My siblings chimed in, accusing me of being ungrateful. When the manipulation didn't work, they resorted to threats. "You owe us," they said. That was when I knew I had to stand my ground. I wasn't just fighting for my financial stability, I was fighting for my autonomy, my right to live on my terms. And if they wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to expose the truth behind our so-called perfect family. To understand why my family felt so entitled to my success, you have to know who they are and what kind of dynamics shaped my childhood. My mother, Evelyn, was the undisputed authority in our household. She carried herself with an air of quiet control, always careful to maintain the illusion of a devoted mother in public. But at home, her love was doled out based on compliance. She favored my older brother, Daniel, and my sister, Laura, because they followed her rules, without question. Me? I was the difficult one, the independent thinker who refused to blindly obey. My father, Richard, was a passive figure, always deferring to my mother. He worked long hours at a job he despised, only to come home and disappear into his recliner. His way of showing affection was through financial support, but emotional connection? That was never his strong suit. He rarely interfered in family matters, especially when it came to my mother's control over us. Daniel, my brother, was the golden child. Everything he did was praised, even when he made mistakes. He was charming, athletic, and effortlessly good at making people like him. But beneath that charm, he was entitled and selfish, always expecting things to be handed to him. Laura, my sister, was quieter, but just as complicit. She played the role of the dutiful daughter, never questioning the way things were run. She went along with my mother's whims, knowing that defying her would only make life harder. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider in my own family. When I was younger, I used to believe that if I just worked hard enough, if I excelled in school, if I did all the chores, if I made myself useful, then maybe I would finally be seen and appreciated. But no matter how much I achieved, it was never enough. The turning point came when I received a full-ride scholarship to college. I thought my parents would be proud, but instead, my mother looked almost annoyed. "That's great, dear," she said in a clipped tone. "But don't think that means you're off the hook. You still have a duty to your family." I remember feeling confused at the time, but I brushed it off. I was finally getting out. I moved away, worked hard, and built a life for myself. But they never let me forget where I came from. Whenever I visited, they would remind me of the things they had given up for me. My mother would say things like, "We sacrificed so much for you. The least you can do is help us out now." Daniel and Laura would chime in, backing her up and reinforcing the narrative that I owed them. At first, I gave in. Small amounts of money here and there. Helping with bills when I could. But then the demands grew. My mother started calling with sob stories about medical bills, even though my father's job provided full coverage. Daniel needed help with his rent, even though he had a stable job. Laura wanted assistance with a new car. Each request came with an expectation, as if it were my duty to provide for them. When I finally started setting boundaries, they turned on me. The guilt-tripping turned into outright anger. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" my mother spat one night over the phone. That's when I realized they had never supported me out of love. It had always been about control. And now that I was slipping out of their grasp, they were desperate to pull me back in. But I wasn't going to let them. At first, I tried to manage their demands as best as I could. I told myself that helping out occasionally was the right thing to do. After all, they were my family. But it wasn't long before their expectations grew more outrageous. One evening, my mother called me, her voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. "Your father and I are struggling to pay the mortgage this month," she said. "Just a little help from you would make things easier." I hesitated. "Mom, I have my expenses. I can't keep sending you money every time you ask." Her tone shifted instantly. "After everything we've done for you? Do you think you would have made it this far without us? We put a roof over your head and sacrificed so much for you. Now, you turn your back on us?" Guilt wrapped around me like a noose. Against my better judgment, I sent them money. But I knew this wasn't going to end there. A month later, my brother, Daniel, reached out. "Olivia, I need your help. My landlord is threatening to evict me. I just need a couple of $1,000 to get back on my feet." I was stunned. "Daniel, you have a job. How do you not have rent money? Come on, you know how hard it is out here. You make more than I do. It's just a loan." I refused. That was when he turned nasty. "Wow. So now that you're successful, you think you're better than us? Don't forget where you came from." When I held firm, my mother called me the next day, furious. "How could you deny your brother? The family looks out for each other. Do you want to see him homeless?" That was when I realized that no matter what I did, they would never see me as anything other than their bank. Every refusal was met with manipulation, and every boundary was dismissed as selfishness. The breaking point came at a family gathering. My father had invited me over under the pretense of a peaceful dinner, but I should have known better. As soon as I sat down, my mother launched into her latest demand. "We've been thinking," she began, "it's time you stepped up and bought us a bigger house." I choked on my drink. "Excuse me?" Daniel leaned in, smirking. "You can afford it, Olivia. You have that fancy job, that nice apartment. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad are still struggling. It's only fair." Laura nodded in agreement. "You wouldn't be where you are without them. This is your chance to give back." My hands clenched into fists. "Are you serious? I've already given you money. I've helped with bills and covered expenses you should have handled yourselves. And now you expect me to buy you a house?" My mother scoffed. "You sound so ungrateful. We raised you. And you act like we're strangers. Because you treat me like a walking ATM, not family." I snapped. "You don't care about me, only what I can give you." That was when my father, usually silent, spoke. "If you don't help, we'll have no choice but to tell people how you abandoned your family. We'll make sure everyone knows how selfish you are." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you blackmailing me?" He shrugged. "Call it what you want, but people will believe us." That was it. The last straw. I stood up, shaking. "You want to ruin my reputation? Go ahead. But I'm done being manipulated. Don't call me again." Their stunned silence followed me as I walked out the door. I knew they wouldn't let me go that easily, but I was finally ready to fight back. I had spent my entire life trying to please them, trying to earn their love, but enough was enough. After walking away from that disastrous dinner, I knew they wouldn't stop. They would keep calling, keep pushing, and if I didn't take a stand now, they would never let me go. The showdown came a week later when my mother called me, her voice icy. "We need to talk. In person." I met them at their house, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. As I stepped inside, I found them all waiting, my mother, father, Daniel, and Laura. It was an ambush, just as I had expected. My mother wasted no time. "You embarrassed us, Olivia. Do you think you can walk out and cut ties just like that? You owe us." I took a deep breath. "I don't owe you anything. And I'm tired of this manipulative guilt tripping." Daniel laughed mockingly. "Oh, come on. We're family. This is how family works. We take care of each other." I met his gaze, unwavering. "You mean I take care of all of you? I've given, and all you do is demand more. You don't care about me, you care about what I can provide." My father, usually the quiet enforcer, finally spoke. "You ungrateful little brat. We sacrificed for you. Do you think we won't make you regret this? We can ruin you." I expected the threats, but this time I had come prepared. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. "You mean like how you faked financial struggles while hiding the money Dad won from his lawsuit? Or how Daniel mysteriously has a new car, despite supposedly being broke? Or how Mom has been spending thousands on shopping sprees while telling me you were on the verge of losing the house?" Their faces went pale. I had been digging into their finances ever since their demands had escalated, and what I found was worse than I imagined. My family was not struggling, they were lying. They had money but had become so used to leeching off of me that they saw no reason to stop. My mother recovered first. "How dare you go snooping into our business?" "Oh, I dare," I shot back. "You threatened to ruin me, so I figured I should protect myself. If you try to spread lies about me, I have no problem exposing the truth. And trust me, I have plenty of proof." Laura's voice was small. "Olivia, please. We didn't mean." "No. You all meant every single word. You manipulated me for years. But I'm done. I am cutting ties, and if any of you even think about trying to guilt me into coming back, I will make sure everyone knows what you've been doing." My father's fists clenched, but for the first time, he was speechless. My mother looked away, her lips pursed tightly. Daniel, the ever-charming con artist, tried one last time. "Olivia, you're overreacting. We're family." "Not anymore," I interrupted. "I deserve better." I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. As I stepped outside, a weight lifted from my chest. I had finally taken my life back. They could no longer control me. I was free. And I would never look back. As I walked away from my family's house that night, I expected to feel guilt, sorrow, and maybe even regret. But what I felt was something entirely different: relief. A kind of freedom I had never known before. For the first time in my life, I was no longer carrying the weight of their expectations, their demands, their manipulations. I was free. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No calls, no messages, nothing. At first, I thought they were scheming, planning their next move, but as the silence stretched on, I realized something: they had nothing left to hold over me. I had taken away their power. Without my compliance, without my financial support and presence, they had lost control. But that didn't mean they wouldn't try again. A week later, I received a message from my sister, Laura. It was short and simple: "Can we talk?" A part of me wavered. Laura had always been the least aggressive, the one who sometimes showed glimpses of remorse. But then I remembered the years of complicity, the way she had stood by and watched while I was used and manipulated. I didn't reply. Then came my mother's email. It was long, emotional, filled with passive-aggressive remarks and thinly veiled guilt trips. "We are still your family, Olivia. Family forgives. Family helps each other." She even ended it with a reminder that one day, we may not be here anymore, and you will regret shutting us out. I almost laughed at the irony. When had they ever helped me? When had they ever supported me without expecting something in return? I didn't reply to that either. Instead, I focused on myself. I invested in my friendships, my work, and my well-being. I started therapy, something I had put off for years because I had convinced myself that my struggles weren't bad enough to need professional help. It turned out they were. The damage my family had done to my sense of self-worth ran deep, and for the first time I was addressing it head-on. And then, something incredible happened: I started to truly heal. Without the constant pressure to prove myself, I began to rediscover who I was outside of their influence. I found joy in simple things, like waking up without dread, spending time with people who genuinely cared for me, and making decisions for myself without fear of repercussions. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old doubts crept in. Was I a bad person for cutting them off? Should I have given them another chance? But every time I considered it, I remembered the years of exhaustion, the emotional manipulation, the threats. I reminded myself that protecting my peace wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Months passed, and eventually, the messages stopped. They realized I wasn't coming back, that I wasn't going to be their source of money and obedience anymore. I heard from a cousin that my brother had moved in with my parents after struggling financially, and my mother had started spinning a narrative about how I had abandoned them despite all they had done for me. Let them say what they want. The truth was, I had given them more than they ever deserved. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in my life, that choice felt right. With each passing day, my life became more my own. The absence of my family's manipulation left a space that I was finally able to fill with things that mattered: peace, purpose, and self-respect. I moved into a new apartment, one that didn't carry the weight of past guilt or obligations. It was a space entirely mine, a symbol of my independence. I decorated it the way I wanted, filling it with books, art, and warmth, things that reflected who I was rather than who I had been forced to be. My work flourished. Without the constant emotional drain of my family, I had more energy to pour into my career. I was promoted, and for the first time I felt like I was succeeding purely for myself, not because I was trying to prove something to people who would never be satisfied. More importantly, I built relationships that were real. I surrounded myself with friends who supported me, who celebrated my successes without expectations, and who didn't see me as a resource, but as a person. I found a sense of belonging that I had never known with my own family. One evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment, sipping tea and watching the city lights flicker outside my window, I realized something: I was happy. Not the forced, fleeting happiness that came from momentary approval or avoiding conflict, but a deep, steady contentment that came from knowing I was finally in control of my life. My family had tried to define my worth by what I could give them. But now, I defined it for myself. I had made the hardest choice of my life, walking away from those who were supposed to love me. And yet, it was the best decision I had ever made. For the first time, I was truly free. Walking away from my family was one of the hardest things I ever did, but it was also the most necessary. Breaking free from manipulation and choosing my happiness over forced obligations was the greatest act of self-love I could have given myself. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, torn between family expectations and your well-being, know this: you are not alone. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to choose yourself. And most importantly, it's okay to walk away from relationships that only bring pain. Have you ever had to stand up against toxic family dynamics? Have you faced the weight of manipulation disguised as love? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Thank you for watching, and remember, your worth isn't defined by what you can give others. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is reclaim your own life.